the greatest mistake we've made in understanding UFOs is assuming they come from somewhere else. For generations, we've been told to look outward, to distant stars, alien worlds, and civilizations light years away. But what if that framing has been wrong from the start? What if the phenomenon isn't extraterrestrial, but temporal? Anthropologist Michael Masters has argued that many UAP may be future humans, descendants of our species who survived catastrophic environmental collapse, genetic bottlenecks, and technological singularities. Humans who learned to bend space-time not to explore the galaxy, but to study their own past. And then there's the testimony of molecular biologist Dan Burisch. Burisch claimed to have worked face-to-face with a being known as J-Rod, a fragile, biologically altered entity that wasn't interested in conquest, domination, or diplomacy. According to Burisch, the J-Rod was interested in us, our DNA, our immune system, our nuclear intentions, and our environment. The J-Rod allegedly spoke of humanity as a species standing at a narrowing point in time, a convergence where ecological collapse, genetic degradation, and unchecked technology threaten not just our future, but theirs. Not an invasion, a warning. Burisch described these beings as suffering, physically diminished by their own choices. Their biology weakened, their world damaged, their survival dependent on understanding where things went wrong. Suddenly, the behavior of the phenomenon makes more sense. The silence, the surveillance, the fixation on military sites, nuclear facilities, and yes, genetic material. The craft that defy inertia, ignore aerodynamics, and move as if space-time itself is the medium, not air or vacuum. These aren't explorers crossing space. They're travelers navigating time. Observers protecting causality. Archivists studying extinction-level events. Witnesses to a past that determines whether their timeline survives at all. If this is true, then UFOs aren't about aliens arriving. They're about future humans returning. And the phenomena isn't asking, are we alone? It's asking something even more disturbing. Do we learn? Or do we repeat the same collapse they already lived through? Because if they are us, then every sighting is a message without words. Every unanswered question is a reminder. The future may already know how this ends.
I had the most bizarre dream I've ever had in my life last night. The most realistic and most bizarre dream. I was in some weird corridor that looked like a building but was odd. Very strange. And I was encountering these beings that looked like people but very different. They were very thin, and they were slightly on the tall side, and they had big heads, like larger than normal, with larger than normal eyes. But they looked like people, and they were playful, and they were scaring me. They scared me, and then they joked around, like we're just joking around. It was the most realistic dream I've ever had in my life. Whatever this was, it felt like living organic beings that were like us. There was also a water element. It was hard to understand what the water element of it was, but there was some sort of an indication that there was water and that there was a protection from you going out into the water. But if you did go into the water, there's a bunch of predators in the water. But they weren't it wasn't like sharks. It was reptile, like crocodile type things that were in the water, and that they had been like feeding them and keeping them calm and like keeping them away. But whatever these beings were in my dream, they were like what humans could eventually be. That's what it felt like. It was very, very realistic. Like there was communication going on. God, I want to read into this because I know it's just a dream, but it was like, get comfortable with this.
You should read into it because it's a dream.
One of the most intense dreams I've ever had in my life, I'm not even kidding, Brian. I was somehow transported into a car with I don't know if it was a J-Rod or just a gray alien, but it fit that image. And it looked me right in the face and was like, do you really want to know I'm real? And I was like, I do want to know. And he stuck out his hand to shake my hand and said, I'm real. And I started just bawling, just like uncontrollable bawling, because all of a sudden, what do I know?
And then she's like, well, you can't go. My friend Eric wants to talk to you. I was like, who's Eric? Don't worry, you'll like him. Just kept saying that over and over. Don't worry, you'll like him. You'll like him. So at some point we end up on the balcony, and I'm just sitting there. I give up. I'm like, fine, I guess I'm just waiting for this Eric guy, whoever the hell that is. So eventually Eric comes in, pulls his chair up right into me. Like his knee is in my dick. Like straight up, right here. I start to get that. I'm very much in the fight or flight thing. And I'm like, like, who the fuck's this guy? Total stranger, never seen him in my life. And his face is right here. He says, I sense that you're angry about this, but I need to be this close for this to work. And then it whoosh, just all went away. And they tell me something that was that same thing that they did to you in that dream. Something that they knew would shock me and make me pay attention. So about 2 weeks before this, I'd been washing dishes, and I just decided I wanted to quit all of this. I was sick of doing TV shoots and podcasts. I was exhausted, want to be home with my family. That's it. That was just a thought.
Just while you were washing
dishes. My wife's right behind me. Didn't tell her anything. Very next thing he says is, we know you've been thinking about quitting lately, and we'd really prefer you not do that yet. Complete stranger. I'd never seen this guy in my life. And he knows a thought in my head
that you had while washing dishes
from 2 weeks
privately.
Ago. And I was just like, how could you possibly know that? And they said, I'm going to use they because they used they. I wasn't talking to this guy. I was talking
like
through
pluribus.
some
like
sort of
TV show.
entity or entities through him. And they said, once you know who we are, you'll know how we know that. And I never had a telepathic moment in my life, but I thought future humans, that's all I could come up with, because this is what I'm doing. They didn't answer the question, but they did say, so you know how we did that? And I just go, uh-huh. Like at one point, this conversation switched from being vocal to telepathic. Like we just started communicating telepathically. It was so seamless that I didn't even really notice it happen. And eventually I'm like, wait, we're not moving our mouths. We're just talking with our brains.
Yeah, it was like the whole room just disappeared, and all I could see was Mike's eyes, so I kind of went straight toward him. The first huge feeling that I picked up, and I probably should have said, hi, my name's Eric, it's nice to meet you.
Maybe it wouldn't have had the same effect though.
Yeah. I just went right into the biggest thing that I felt I needed to tell him was, we feel like you're thinking about quitting, and we'd really prefer you not to. And that really got his attention because I think that was, weighing on his mind, the heaviest. I'm used to putting my executive function in the back seat and putting my experiencer function in the front seat.
Yeah.
And for a lot of us, it's almost like slipping into a dreamlike state. So you may not remember all of it. You may not remember some of it.
Yeah.
I'm very used to it, so I was very lucid while that was going on. Now, obviously, Heidi slipped in while she was in the room with Mike, and she's got very little memory of trying to detain him, to keep him.
Right.
And the fact that she was saying, I wanted to meet him, was not true. And Heidi is an extremely honest person. So it was definitely the phenomenon that kind of took over, the situation. Not too long after that, I introduced a master's to one of my colleagues at Harvard, and they ended up writing about this subject. And it turned out to be the world's most read, Harvard's most read paper in history. Still to this day is the most read paper at Harvard University.
Do you believe it was future humans?
I don't know if it was or not. I mean, I can't really pinpoint. The intelligence itself were multiple consciousnesses. I can say that.
Okay.
They were kind of taking turns going in there. So it was multiple. It wasn't demonic. I've heard that rumor before. It's nothing like that. They are extremely polite, extremely intelligent. So, nothing's going to happen that you don't want to happen. It's a very, very polite exchange. More polite than human beings, I can tell you that right now. But does the future human hypothesis hold water? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Does it account for everything that's going on out there? Not possible. At the end of the day, what Mike is doing is leaving that possibility open for future humans to look into, because, I mean, it is a great hypothesis. In no way, shape, or form can you remove it from the table. And it might account for some of the activity that's going on out there.
Yeah.
I'm in shock. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? How does this complete stranger know my thoughts? We're out on this balcony. These three women come out at one point. And this man, who now is like just right here, like eyes right here. I can't move anymore. Like I lost the ability to turn my head. I'm just like laser focused. Said, can you close the door behind you? That was it. And these three women turned in perfect unison, walked back in, closed the door. Nobody came out the rest of the time we were out there. Eventually got to the point where they're like, we came here because we need to put three things in your brain for some future time or times. I forget which they said. Do we have your permission to do that? And over the course of this interaction, I started to remember them. I know you. I know who you are. Not that guy. I'd never seen him in my life. But I know you, and there's a familiarity. And this was like the breaking down of me to be able to get past that, to do the things that needed to be done. They told me what would happen. They said that I would continue looking, my eyes would be open, but this darkness would come from top to bottom, and they would put things in my brain, and I would see it coming in, but I wouldn't have access to it once they were done. Do you agree? They're very polite, extremely polite. Free will was conserved. Do you agree to this? Are you okay with this? And again, at that point, I remembered them. I recognized them. I was like, yes, absolutely. I agree to this. That's exactly what happened. And I see this massive, fast stream of information just going straight into my brain. It was exhausting. It didn't hurt, but it was like really overwhelming. I have no idea how long they were doing this. It was,
you said you see it pulling into your brain?
I could see. It was like I could see. I don't remember it, but I could see and understand the moments, and it wasn't just me. But the woman who brought me up there in the first place was standing to my left with her hand on my shoulder. She would occasionally go, "Did you get that? Did you see that? That was important. Did you get that?" So she was watching it too and saw it coming in as it was coming through this individual in front of me. And I could see it at that moment. I'd be like, like I understood it. It all comes in. I have no idea how long I was in that mesmerized state, but after they finished, that entire room had 5 times more people in it. There was like probably 20 people in this room. I felt like my head was a bowling ball. Like I could barely even lift my head. And this woman, I think one of the ones that came out when we were on the balcony, put her hand on my shoulder, said, "Are you okay?" I was just like, Walked past her. Fortunately, I was on that same floor, on the 4th floor of this hotel. Walked down, lay back on the bed with my feet still on the floor, all my clothes on, and just slept in that position for about 13 hours.
What?
Didn't wake up at all. And when I woke up, I started crying uncontrollably. Like I could not stop crying. I wasn't sad. I wasn't scared. I had a memory of what happened the night before, but it was kind of fuzzy. And then as it started to come back more and more and more, I started to be like, oh shit, like that was real. You know, my first thought was like, oh, that wasn't real. And then I was allowed to remember all of it. Everything before they put me in that state is like crystal clear in my mind. And I wrote it all down.
My recollection, my memory, and I know that it was very brief. Like, would the encounter seemed very brief. It might have gone longer than I think it did.
Well, they might have done the same thing to you. That's why I mention it. They might have done the same thing where you weren't necessarily allowed to remember the things that were done. Like, they told me that we're going to do this. Are you okay with it? And then missing time. It's fucking insane. It's my brain.
Right.
They put things in there. The ability that they can even do that in the first place is nuts. But I don't have access to it.
What is the point in giving someone information that they can't access?
Well, that's what they said, though. They said for
Right.
time or times in the future. It's time released. It's time stamped. At some point, whatever that was that they thought was so damn important to mini abduct me at this conference and fuck with me for about 5 months afterwards is going to come out at some point.
Have you ever-
They knew my future. They knew everything about me. They knew my thoughts. That's how they broke me down. And they even knew where I was going to be the next day. They saw that it fucked me up and I was not doing well. Like, I wasn't crying because I was sad or scared or anything. It was just a physiological response to whatever they did. I'm walking down through the main corridor to give a book to a friend of mine, John Dover, Navajo Ranger. And that same guy comes around the corner, comes down, puts his hand on my shoulder, says, "Are you okay?" I was not okay. But I go, "Uh-huh." And they fixed me.
I'm alone, and my mother's somewhere out. It's a summer night, it's a nice warm summer night, probably August, and the phone rings, and I pick up the phone, and I hear, first, I can hardly hear just like coordinates, like numbers, like 7, 6, but in a strange voice, but very low, and I'm trying to listen, I don't quite, can't get it, and then the volume increases, and I hear also clunking, like switching circuits. Oh, I was reading a book at the time on the early computers, mechanical relay computers called Switching Circuits, Bell Laboratories. So I'm hearing like the clunking. So it's like a computer. Okay, what I thought, what people thought of computers. Well, 1953, hardly anybody even knew what a computer was, but I did. And so and then gets louder, and then Stephen Hawking. You know who Stephen Hawking
Oh, yeah.
is? Okay, well, you know what he sounded like because he couldn't talk? The metallic voice. It's the Stephen Hawking voice in 1953. Okay, I'm hearing this right, and it says and identifies itself as a computer on board a flying saucer from the future. Says, well, I think it said it was on board a spacecraft from the future.
Okay.
It may have said flying, but I was into flying saucers already by then. So it was space. It's a time machine, time travel. Right away, I'm told it's time travel. And they said they are contacting several hundred. I think they said even 400. I think I heard that 400 young receptive minds that they want to teach their technology to. And I'm trying to think I got the joke, who's doing this? And then suddenly it occurs to me, none of my friends of my age group were as smart as me in terms of science. They weren't into all this stuff. They were like normal kids. I was an abnormal kid. I was a nerd. But these kids, they're just all American, back, so it couldn't have been a kid. And also, none of them had access to the kind of technology that can make a cold metallic voice, right? And if it's got to be an adult, this is like going through my mind, and then so that could be dangerous. That was, knew that there may be weirdos around. So I let it continue. And it said I had to now tell them out of my own free will if I wanted to participate in this project. No. I think, internal dialogue, no. But then I feel like an electric shock go from the base of my spine to the back of my head here. It's like an electrical feeling. And I hear myself saying yes. And then they say, and they also said that they said, good. And now they said, I will begin to meet the others in 20 years. So it's going to be time travel. Right? They're telling me what's going to happen 20 years in the future, 73, right? So, and then they said, then the voice says, go out on your fire escape and we're going to send a ship to pick you up in 10 minutes. All right. So so we all said, the flying saucer's coming to get me, coming to pick me up. And, so the four of us kids, we go up to my place within the 10-minute period, and that's it. Nothing ever happened.
The main thing is that I've become known for advocating for this idea that UFOs and the aliens are actually our time-traveling future human descendants. I wouldn't even say as opposed to extraterrestrials, because I do think that's a component too. I oftentimes get pigeonholed. People are like, oh, you just think they're all time travelers. I don't. I actually say this all the time, but it doesn't matter. I do think there's a lot going on. But my background and the reason I approach this question this way is because there's a lot of characteristics of these aliens that look so hominin. They look just like us. And specifically what we'd expect to see in our hominin future if the same evolutionary trends continue into the future. And even the saucer-shaped craft seemingly are time machines themselves. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version.
When you look at the archetypal, these iconic sort of shapes that have been on cave walls all the way up to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, one thing they share is that they have no muscle, they have large heads, they have big eyes.
And they're childlike. They're very paedomorphic, as we say. Yeah, you just tied together like a lot of really important points related to this theory. Aspects of why they're always interested in our gametes, why they come back and put that little machine on a man to collect semen, why they're constantly taking eggs from females and implanting fetuses, pulling them back out later. Like they're clearly focused on reproduction, gamete extraction, and one of the things that might be fueling that in the future, if these are future humans, let's just assume for a second, hypothetically, is that they might be having problems directly resulting from these trends toward self-domestication, these trends toward feminization, these trends toward reduced sperm counts, which is 60% across most populations of the world, in the industrialized world, 50% across the entire world. Problems with reproduction, in vitro fertilization, exogenesis chambers might help solve some of those problems, growing the fetus outside of the body. So yeah, and like you said, what do they look like? They look like kind of a hybrid between males and females to some extent, but there's still an essence of gender. Like if you talk to Whitley Strieber, he's with this being, he says in Communion that I had a sense that she was a woman. I don't know why, but I kind of sensed that. So it's almost like the essence of the individual, the soul of the individual still retains that sort of gender identity, even though our bodies are becoming more childlike, more gender indiscriminate. I don't know. But yeah, yet another one of those ways in which we might sort of grow together as a species.
This is the problem that's always been theorized about time travel. Anything that you do, if you went back in time, any interactions, you would completely change how the future would play out.
In the many worlds interpretation, yeah. What most physicists don't agree on many things, but most agree that we live in what's called a block universe, landscape time, block time, where if you imagine all moments from the very beginning of the Big Bang to the end of the universe, where all matter disappears into like a black hole or contracts or whatever it does, all moments are already there. They exist as this massive four-dimensional block of all moments, all world lines, everything. So you go back into the past as you perceive it, you can do whatever you want. You can walk around, step on butterflies, slap people on the face, kick over, dinosaurs or whatever. I don't think we can go back that far, but you could do anything you want and it doesn't change anything because you're going back in the block universe and doing those things you were always already going to do. And when you get home, everything's the same because that was already their past. To everybody that stayed behind, that was already their past. It was only the future for you to go back and do those things that you were already going to do. And then you just went and did them, get home, everything's the same because you were always going to do those things in the first. I think they need tremendously high speed in order to be able to go back into the past. I basically just started with Einstein's theory of relativity, which he published in 1905 on the electrodynamics of moving bodies. And then in 1915, he published his paper on general relativity. From that point on, almost instantly, there were solutions to his field equations that showed, with the right parameters of a massively highly energetic rotating ring or sphere or disk, that you could create closed time light curves, that you could actually orient light cones back toward the past so you can physically go into the past. You know, if you look at the history of how we understand backward time travel, what I think they're doing is that I think they're combining general relativity and special relativity. So I think they're orienting the light cones toward the past by rotating these things really, really fast. You hear that all the time. They power up, they're spinning, or at least there's some sort of flywheel on the outside that's spinning. I think that's what's allowing them to move toward the past, and then pew, they take off. There are limits to how fast we can go. Einstein was very adamant about this because there's an increase in inertial forces the faster you go relative to the speed of light. That's why he thought we could never go. That's why he thought that anything with mass could never go faster than the speed of light. So I think there's a limit to how fast we can go. The other reason is because Jim Penniston in this hypnotic regression said that. He's like, we can only go 40 to 60,000 years into the past or we might not get back. You also have, and this is a more speculative one, so take it for what it's worth, you also have the Dan Burisch testimony of this J-Rod, this allegedly captured alien, who said, we're from the future. We are you from the future, and we're from about 55 to 60,000 years in your future. So
initially, I was briefed that J-Rod was an alien, specifically from the reticulum system, to reticulum 4. I had no idea the truth. Yes, from 2 reticulum 4 now, but I had no idea the truth of how they came to be. As I said to you before, I have never met an alien, but I have met an extraterrestrial. I found out subsequent to interactions with the J-Rod.
We're going to walk through one of the more complex and controversial ideas to come out of the UFO and whistleblower space. It's called the doctrine of the convergent timeline, as described by Dan Burisch. This is not mainstream science. This is not confirmed history. This is a claimed framework, one that attempts to explain human origins, time travel, and extraterrestrial involvement through a branching and recovering model of timelines. What's really compelling is not whether it's true, but how internally consistent the narrative is and how it overlaps with recurring themes across UFO lore, genetics, and long-term survival scenarios. What is the convergent timeline? According to Burisch, time does not behave as a single straight line. Instead, timelines can branch due to catastrophic events or technological interference, diverge for long periods, and in rare cases, attempt to reconverge toward a stable outcome. The doctrine of the convergent timeline suggests that our present timeline is being interfered with because it represents a critical junction, a point where multiple futures either stabilize or end completely. The catastrophe that split humanity. In Burisch's account, the original split begins with a catastrophic planetary event in humanity's future. The exact cause kind of varies depending on the retelling. But to some, environmental collapse, nuclear conflict, or a cascading technological disaster could cause this event. What matters is the result. Human civilization fractures. And there's 2 primary survival paths going forward. One is to get off world. Two is subterranean survival. Not aliens in the classic sense, but us. Far down different evolutionary roads. Let's talk about the ones that went off world, the Orions. One branch of humanity that leaves Earth entirely come to be known as the Orions. They migrate deep into space, with accounts often placing them in regions associated with the Orion complex. Over long periods, the group maintains a more recognizable human morphology. It retains technological advantage, and it develops strong time navigation and observational capabilities. In Burisch's framework, the beings are often described as tall, human-like, highly advanced, less emotionally expressive, but still recognizably human. They are sometimes portrayed as observers or stewards, deeply concerned with preventing certain catastrophic outcomes. Not out of altruism, but survival necessity. If the past collapses, their future collapses with it. Now, the second group becomes known as the Zeta Reticulan line. The second branch is a little more disturbing. They don't leave Earth. Instead, they retreat underground for survival for thousands and thousands of years. According to Burisch, this prolonged subterranean existence produces dramatic biological changes. Underground survival and morphological change could very well happen. Living underground for millennia would impose intense selective pressures. No sunlight, limited resources, confined environments, and reliance on technology over biology for survival. Over time, Burisch claims this results in enlarged craniums to support neurological processing, reduced musculature, thinner frames, loss of pigmentation, large, light-sensitive eyes, and a reduced reproductive capacity. So in other words, the classic gray morphology. In this doctrine, the beings associated with Zeta Reticuli are not extraterrestrials at all. They are future humans, so biologically altered that they appear alien to us. Why come back? Well, here's the key motivation for the Zetas coming back in time. According to Burisch, the Zeta Reticulan line is genetically unstable. It suffers from reproductive collapse, and in its time, it's facing extinction. So they cannot survive without some form of intervention. The solution they come up with is temporal recursion, returning to earlier points in the timeline to study baseline human genetics, attempt hybridization, and manipulate key events to ensure their survival. This is why, in the doctrine, abduction narrative focus so heavily on reproduction, genetics, and monitoring. It's not conquest, it's desperation for survival. This is where the doctrine becomes unstable, with timeline interference and ethical conflict. By interfering with the past, the Zeta Reticulans risk preventing their own emergence, altering the convergent point, or creating paradoxes that collapse entire branches. Now, the Orion-associated humans, according to Burisch, oppose excessive interference. They favor minimal influence, guiding outcomes without destabilizing causality. This creates a temporal conflict, not a war of weapons, but of outcomes. With all this going on, why does our timeline matter now? Burisch repeatedly emphasized that our present era is a convergence window. a narrow band where environmental decisions, technological development, AI, nuclear risk, and genetic engineering are all going to have a determining factor in whether humanity stabilizes or it fractures again. In this doctrine, UFO presence increases during convergence periods, not because aliens suddenly appear, but because the future is attempting to anchor itself. Look, you don't have to believe the Dan Burisch timeline to find this doctrine fascinating. What matters is that it reframes aliens as consequences, not invaders. It places responsibility back on human decision-making, and it treats the future as fragile, not fixed. Whether metaphor, misdirection, or something else entirely, the doctrine of the convergent timeline forces a sobering question. If humanity survives, what will we become? And if we don't, who comes back to fix it? And I want to thank Brian Jackson from theburisharchive.com for this wonderful graphic.
How did J-Rod get here? I mean, how did he, 15 light years away?
He crashed in '63, from what I understand,
What was that? Right?
outside of Kingman,
Okay.
Arizona.
Right.
Say what makes this crash so different is all the research, witness testimony, and even evidence surrounding it.
The Kingman crash is definitely in the top 5.
Author Preston Dennett is one of those researchers.
There's just a very small handful of UFO crash retrieval reports in the United States that have that kind of verification to them.
So we decided to find that information ourselves. Going to the Mojave Museum of History in Kingman, combing through old newspaper clippings, sketches, and even redacted government documents allegedly detailing the crash from those who were there, including Fritz Werner.
We now know him to be Arthur Stansel.
The documents claim Stansel was an Air Force engineer who studied the impact nuclear blasts had on homes and buildings.
And we're driven for 3 or 4 hours, and we're not sure just where we were going. Several of us tried to guess where we might have been. We, at that time, came to the conclusion it was in the area of Kingman, Arizona.
After getting off the bus, as recreated here, the scientists were taken to an even more remote location. They had no idea exactly where they were or what they were about to see.
We were told that we had been selected for various technical specialties. It looked like 2 saucers, I would call it, one on top of the other, inverted, probably 25 to 30 feet in diameter. Well, it would look like a brushed aluminum. I'm sure it probably wasn't that. I say that because I noticed no scratch marks. And anything that would penetrate into the sand 20 inches that way would certainly have some scratch marks. No signs of buckling, fracture, or anything. Not that I could see. I accepted it was probably some United States government vehicle, a highly classified vehicle. In fact, we were told that that's what it was. There was also a tent, which I didn't get to look into, but one fellow whom I did happen to talk with briefly until they told us to stop talking, said that he had seen 2 bodies inside this tent, 2 alien-looking bodies. It was brown, leathery skin, had a silver, like a cap on, without a bill. Like a skull cap? Yes, like a skull cap.
4 feet tall and wearing a silver metallic suit. Surrounded by military police, the workers conducted their studies in the dead of night. It doesn't say how long they were there, but when they got back on the bus, an Air Force colonel who was in charge of the operation made them take an oath to keep this a secret. 20 years later, Stansel came forward, signing this affidavit, allegedly confirming what he saw. Then 50 years later, another secret about the crash was released by former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, between him and a senior United States government member whose name has been redacted, claiming people would be slack-jawed if word got out about what they know, writing the U.S. government seized the Kingman UFO.
These craft are scooped up, taken to various Air Force bases, scientific labs, and studied intently.
I would enter into the clean sphere, and I was not supposed to communicate with the J-Rod at all. I was not supposed to know his name. The reality is we were communicating from the time that I entered into the ambassadorial suite external to the clean sphere, talking back and forth freely. I could hear whatever he was projecting at me from thought, and he could very clearly hear what I was thinking, the gentleman with which I was associated was approximately 3.5 feet tall. He had a dark brown appearance, very ruddy appearance to his skin. He was in a highly pressurized clean sphere. He exuded glycoprotein-like material through pores on his skin. Large head in comparison to torso, so the ratio of the cranial to the torso area would be larger than in what we would call a modern human being. Large, bulbous black eyes. The whites of the eyes had been selected out, so it looked like a large pupil, basically. When you look into his eyes, you feel like you're going to fall into his eyes forever. And I think that probably had something to do with the telepathic nature of his mental structure. Large arms, large length. 4 very thin, sinuous fingers, nails. He was hunched over most of the time, could not support himself fully, given muscular atrophy, and that had to do with the peripheral neuropathy under which he was suffering. So he would grunt and move toward me almost in a flopping fashion. Feet were large in comparison to what we would, say our feet would be. He was unclothed 4. And he was unclothed, which bothered him. He wanted to wear clothing and was refused in every turn. Called himself captive, and justifiably so. Nose was recessed, not a nose like we have, but basically two opercula, 2 orifices. An extremely small mouth, a hard palate, no teeth. Smarter than me. He was smarter than me by a long range.
Did he have a wide range of knowledge?
The mathematics that he showed me blew my mind.
Was that right?
He showed me concurrently not only the equations for the rule of nines, but he also did so diagrammatically, and he did so with 3-dimensional, like a VRML system, where I was watching cubes come together. So that if I was not understanding the script, I would understand it as a child learns group theory in mathematics.
So those 3 things together are why I don't think we could go back 65 million years to hunt dinosaurs, which actually would be kind of fun. I owe a lot of the fact that anybody even knows who I am to Hal Puthoff. When I first started talking about this publicly in 2018, and then I published my book in 2019, Identified Flying Objects, he, I guess, reached out to the head of MUFON at the time, who was putting together the 50th anniversary MUFON event, and was like, hey, you should have this Mike Masters guy come talk. And I found that out from the head of MUFON. He's like, hey, just so you know, Hal Puthoff, of all people, recommended I contact you. I had no idea who that is, so I get on the internet, I Google Hal Puthoff. He also put Jesse Michaels, mutual friend, in touch with me after, I think he did an interview with him and Weinstein. I forget his name.
Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he did an interview with those 2. I guess Hal was like, hey, you should reach out to Mike Masters. And he did, and we talked, and we've done stuff together. What was cool is that at the end of that Age of Disclosure film, when he's talking about the space-time bubble, I thought back to after my first book came out, and I was contacted by someone who claimed to be an ex-intelligence person who explained that exact same thing to me back in 2019, that these things aren't doing 10,000 G maneuvers that would crush anything inside. To them, in their frame of reference, what they feel is completely different than what we see. Because in that space-time bubble, they can be moving at 50,000 miles an hour, do a right-hand turn, and it would splatter anything inside because of the G-forces. That's what we see on the outside. But in that space-time bubble, they probably feel 1-2 Gs at the most. So I started thinking, man, was that Hal? Did Hal reach out to me with like a different email address and say, hey, just so you know, this is how these things are happening. This is how they're able to do it. They're manipulating the rate at which time passes in this bubble around the craft, and we see something completely different.
So when we're seeing this, we are imagining what we can do. And we're sort of saying, well, what would be an advanced version of what we can do? And what this technology is something that's levels of magnitude beyond even our theoretical, like any sort of idea that we have currently about, you know, potential future timelines of technology.
Yeah.
There's no one talking about gravity bubbles that allow you to instantaneously traverse immense gaps in the universe.
Well, they might be talking about it behind closed doors at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Right.
And have been for 70 years,
yeah, that's
give or
the problem.
take.
That's the real problem with disclosure. Like, how much progress could we have made if they had opened up all this stuff?
You believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier. Do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
Biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human.
They describe these crafts, these crash crafts, as donations.
Case. I don't like to characterize necessarily where they came from. They're definitely some kind of non-human sentience, but it is true, believe it or not, we've recovered the vehicles. And we actually have physical proof, and I was actually partially cleared into some of those activities. It was beyond oral testimony provided to me. I actually had partial access to the data and actually read the intelligence reports resulting from those programs.
Like,
and
with your own eyes,
Correct.
You saw it.
Yes.
It is commonly talked about that what we are getting, even when we weaponize it, is a donation, a gift.
And you got to imagine if you were an intelligent life form from another planet. You know, Diana Pasulka talked about, her and Gary Nolan talked about how they refer to some of these things as donations.
Interview subjects clearly imply that some of the they state that some of the UAP we're seeing might be our reverse engineer technology. One of the things shared that I found fascinating was this idea that some of the craft that we've recovered and adversarial nations have recovered weren't crash crafts and weren't crafts that they caused to crash. They were crafts that just appeared outside a military base, almost like a gift. So gifts, donations, but
yeah.
the thought, if you try to explain that, why would anyone do that? Maybe some more advanced species is trying to help advance us and try to like put a carrot on a stick.
And so the theory is that all of these advanced beings, from wherever they're from, the various different species of them, that all of them have this particular type of technology.
Yeah.
You know, like, what's this case that you guys keep talking about with the king in Arizona? They're like, oh, it was like they just landed and left. I was like, well, how do you know they what do you mean landed and left? And they're like, well, the doors were open and nobody home, and they walked off. I said, you mean somebody just flew this thing down, it landed on the ground in the desert in Kingman, Arizona in 1953, and they left the doors open and left, and they were like, yep, that's pretty much what happened. Flew it down and left a craft on the ground. I was told that, and I wouldn't be repeating this if I didn't think there was some serious credibility to it. Not a scratch. I go, not a scratch? What? Not a scratch? Not a scratch on the... No, it was perfect. Didn't have a scratch.
Maybe it's, survival of the fittest for the nations of Earth. Maybe it's a big IQ test. Who knows what it is? But that's an interesting scenario and seems intentional from whoever.
I said I'm going to be talking about the crashes in the 40s. There was a pause, and he says, why just the 40s? The government is very aware that this intelligence is pitting different countries against each other based on religion, on purpose. Parts of the government that know about the UFO phenomenon, the ones that call the others, the ones that are influencing countries, the ones that are by design or maybe by accident happening to crash a very advanced piece of technology in the country's borders so they make better weapons to fight bigger wars. And we're not the only ones that have had a crash, potentially just to see who is stronger. And that's a scary thing. It's a multi-level chess game, and they have to sit back and go, what is the reason they just happen to have had a crash here? What is the reason there's a huge religious war going on right now? What is the reason that all of a sudden, China's defense budget has quadrupled in the past few years?
And he calls them donations, that possibly they're doing this on purpose to help advance our society or something. Give us little breadcrumbs, if you will.
The UFO cargo cult, right? And obviously, Tyler and James view these parts as donate. They call it the donation site.
You say something at the beginning of Chapter 9 about a craft of unknown origin that our government finally accessed the inside. Can you share with us what's in the book, and is there anything else you can add to that?
That occurred let's say in a congressional facility. There was more to it, considerably more to that discussion about what this situation was. We can't go into that.
You're telling us, you told us, because you were allowed to tell us, that our government has a UFO in its possession and has been able to access the inside of it, right?
Yes. It makes
why is it delicate?
Described in here look primitive.
Why is it delicate? Why is this topic that the United States government has a UFO in its possession and we've been reverse engineering it? You've admitted it. Why is it delicate?
The details.
For decades, the public conversation around UFOs has centered on a single question. What are they? But there's another question, one that may be more consequential and far less comfortable. Who controls the technology? If we accept the growing body of testimony, historical reporting, and insider accounts indicating that the U.S. military and its partners began recovering crashed anomalous vehicles as early as the 1930s, then the implications are significant, because recovery is only the first step. What follows that is analysis, exploitation, and ultimately attempts at replication. According to multiple sources across decades, these recovered vehicles and materials did not remain within traditional military structures. Instead, they are moved into deeply compartmentalized programs, often referred to as legacy programs, operating outside the standard oversight. Programs so restricted that even senior government officials and elected leaders have been denied access. In many accounts, the technical work itself was shifted to private industry. Aerospace contractors, defense firms, and research laboratories operating under the highest levels of security. This arrangement matters. Private industry is not bound by the same transparency requirements as government agencies. It can retain discoveries indefinitely, bury failures, and continue work across generations without any public accountability. If reverse engineering efforts began nearly a century ago, then even slow, incremental progress would compound over time. Decades of trial and error, breakthroughs quietly classified, failures quietly absorbed, and successes quietly folded into black projects. Under that framework, the idea that some of the objects we now label as UFOs or UAPs could represent advanced human-made systems is no longer extraordinary. It becomes a plausible outcome of long-term, secret technological development. This does not suggest that every unidentified object in the sky belongs to us, but it does suggest that the public narrative, one that treats all advanced sightings as unexplained or external, may be incomplete. There's another critical dimension to this story: legality. If these legacy programs operated without proper congressional authorization, without lawful oversight, and without transparent funding, then exposure would not simply reveal advanced technology. It would expose decades of constitutional violations, misappropriated funds, and a parallel system of governance operating beyond democratic control. In that context, secrecy becomes less about national security and more about institutional survival. Because disclosure would not only force answers about what we recovered, it would force accountability for how those programs were hidden, who authorized them, and who benefited from them. And that may be the strongest motive for cover-up. Because the most dangerous revelation is not that we are not alone, but that we may already possess extraordinary technology developed in secret beyond the law and beyond public consent.
And there's a group of other people there, including some well-known congressmen. Senator Alan Cranston was allegedly there. Congressman George E. Brown, who was the chairman of the Congressional Committee on Space Science and Advanced Technology, was there. But there were two pieces, or two sections to this particular hangar on the inside. On the southern side, which would be over here, they had a number of aircraft, including the first generation Aurora, which I'll go into a little bit more here in a bit. They had the F-117A stealth fighter. They had the losing competitor in the B-2 advanced technology bomber competition, which led to the creation of the Flying Wing Northrop B-2 bomber, the Spirit. They were brought into an area where there were 3 flying saucers hovering off the floor, no landing gear underneath, basically just floating. And there was the smallest of the 3 vehicles. It had a rolling staircase in front of it. You could climb up, you could look inside, see the components. They had a videotape playing on a TV next to it that showed one actually flying around and doing various things. They had a podium with a 3-star general that got up and described the capabilities of this vehicle and 2 other larger versions of it that were behind it, much larger. You can tell by the size of the door going inside. The synthetic vision system, which involved a number of cameras on the outside. This is the 60-foot version here. This one here was somewhere between 150 and 120 feet in diameter.
I'm here at Shield AI getting an exclusive first look at the X-Bat. It's an autonomous fighter jet, meaning there's no pilot. It's entirely powered by an AI system called HiveMind.
X-Bat is a next-generation warfighter. It has capabilities to fly long distance, carry munitions, be fully autonomous, and be anywhere that defense needs it.
X-Bat is the first airplane in the world that is AI piloted and vertical takeoff, launch, and land. We, Shield AI, have flown the F-16 autonomously, but those two things, AI piloted and vertical takeoff, launch, and land, have never come together in the form of a next generation aircraft.
The X-Bat is a fighter jet that can be equipped with missiles and used for combat. The company says that one of its driving missions is to save the lives of service members with pilot-free aircrafts.
Shield AI has long been focused on building drones, but now it's hinging a lot of its future on the AI software that's used to power them, like the hive mind in the X-Bat.
The software is a cornerstone and foundation for everything we do.
The number one benefit of being able to take off vertically is that you are no longer constrained by a runway. They are massive, stationary, expensive infrastructure targets for the enemy.
If the future hypothesis is wrong, then this was only a thought experiment. But if it's even partially correct, then we've misunderstood the phenomena at the most fundamental level, not as visitors, not as invaders, but as consequences. According to the accounts we explored, the beings described weren't gods or demons or aliens from distant stars. They were fragile, diminished, altered by time and by choice. If Dan Burisch's claims are to be believed, they weren't here to conquer us. They're here because something's gone terribly wrong. A future where humanity survives, but only barely. A future where the environment collapses, genetics degrade, and technology outpaces wisdom. A future where the only option left is to look back. Look back to study that moment when everything could still be changed. That reframes every encounter, every silent craft hovering over cities, every interest in nuclear weapons, every fixation on DNA, reproduction and biology. Not curiosity, diagnosis, and maybe intervention without interference. If they are us, then they can't warn us directly. They can't interfere openly. They can only observe, nudge, and hope we notice. Which raises the most uncomfortable question of all. What if the phenomena isn't asking us to believe? What if it's asking us to choose? Choose sustainability over destruction, restraint over escalation, and wisdom over speed. Because time travel, if it exists, doesn't exist to save everyone. It exists to preserve a timeline. And that timeline may depend on what we do next. So maybe the reason there's no clear message, no landing on the White House lawn, no open contact, is because the message was never meant to be spoken. It was meant to be lived. If the future is watching us, then this moment matters more than we've ever been told. Not because we're being judged, but because we're being remembered. In history, it hasn't been written yet.